Afternoon.
Also on Zoom. I have the honor today to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Natasha James. She's the founder of Legacy Charter School in Prince George's County, Atlanta, Maryland. And so, you guys, please welcome Ms. Natasha James.
That's my most concise introductions I've heard.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. My name is Natasha James, and there were so many moments that struck me during the introduction, and I just want to say and express my appreciation for the Rotary Club, meeting Musa and understanding his connection to the organization, and reflecting on my own personal family history. My grandfather was part of the Rotary Club, and my brother, when he was going through a really rough patch in life, the Rotary Club took him in, and to this day, he's still very much involved. So I appreciate your inclusive nature and making folks from all walks of life feel very included in this particular organization. And so I'm here today. One of the other things that struck me was one of the members named Mary Terrell. And when I first moved here to Washington, D.C. from Buffalo, New York, the first school I was assigned to as a principal was in Washington, D.C.'s Ward 8 at Mary Church Terrell Elementary School. And as you were talking about birthdays and that kind of thing, I am so proud to be standing here on the last day of me being 42, moving into 43. Yes. Congratulations for being inducted as the new president as well, continuing to push the puck forward. And so I'm here as a public servant who is also a proud mom. My daughter's graduating from high school on tomorrow from Basis, DC. And I know I saw some heads turn back and say, no, that's not possible. I have a 21-year-old son and my daughter who's graduating. I met my husband when I was a sophomore in high school, 15 years old, and we'll be celebrating near 30 years together very soon. And so, I know, everybody pick up their jar and finish eating. It's making me blush now. But my road to service was a very unusual one in that I went to a law magnet program in school, and I had aspirations and every intention of becoming an attorney. In fact, I took my high school mock trial team to finals, and I was very passionate about that until I had my internship at the district attorney's office and had to do a 250-page deposition, and I thought, I didn't learn to read to be so tired and bored all the time. And so my mother was a nurse, and she did infant and maternal care at the Westside Health Center, where she served a large Puerto Rican community, which is part of my origin story as well. I'm a proud Afro-Puerto Rican. And so I was always their fake candy striper and the midwives. And I knew so much, but I didn't know anything. But I felt very prepared and apt at science. And so I went on to university to major in pre-med. And I went to a school, and I'm not saying this to boast or brag, but just when you say she couldn't be good at all these things, I went to a gifted and talented school where they made you believe you could do anything, and I also thought I could do all these things. Until I finished anatomy and physiology, and that was a 5-credit class. I made it through, and then all of a sudden I developed a tremendous aversion to blood, and I tried to keep quiet from my folks. Until a situation occurred that made me pass out in front of them and landed me in the emergency room. And at which point, it was a life-changing moment in that my grandmother was passing away, and I passed out while she was in the hospital. And I was so afraid that this secret of mine had been uncovered during this time period, and my grandmother did pass shortly on, but when we were reviewing home videos, she said, that's gonna be my school teacher. Never in a million years would anyone have ever called on me to be anybody's teacher for a number of reasons. One, I'm the second of 5 siblings and was parentified very early, so kids and taking care of them or doing anything to further support them was not in the cards for me, or so I thought. And I didn't see that as a thing to do. And when my grandmother called on me to be a teacher, I thought, this has to be some joke. However, I took a job that was America Reads in 1999, where I learned how to tutor students how to read. And knowing what you know about me now, reading was something that was just an implicit, you know how to do it, like walking and talking. I had never met and encountered someone who literally could not read. And there was a small child, her name was Shaquilla Miller, second grade, and she was so particularly naughty. And I was so shocked by the fact that her teacher was so willing to push her out of the class to me, someone who had only had 3 hours worth of tutoring training. And I thought, how difficult could this be for someone to learn how to read? And I remember this so vividly, and I'm embarrassed. And for a few years after, she and I kept in touch. And I said to her, are you really making this up that you can't read? She said, why would I do it? She picks on me and she knows I don't know it. And then when I start to act out, she sends me out of class. It just seems unfair. I said, it seems fair enough, right? And so I began pushing off my science, and I taught myself how to teach reading. And I committed to her that as long as she showed up, we would have this done. I swear, guys, it was the longest road. It felt like watching paint dry, because we really only worked on 2 books. We would tap out, sound out, stomp out, sing out, sounds, words, all the things. And I felt like it would never happen. Well, we go through the year. In March, she says to me, Ms. Johnson, I have something to show you. And I said, well, what do you have? And she pulled out a book that she and I hadn't been practicing on, and she started to read. And that moment where the heavens opened up, that moment happened for me that day. And I went home in the courage of my conviction and told my family, I'm gonna be a teacher. And my father, after he went through his little mourning period and got himself together, he just asked me, he said, if this is what you're gonna do, be the best at it and go as far as you can. And so that's what I did. I set out to be the best teacher, the best mom, and the best educator I could. And finding your way is difficult because you don't always have everything you need at one time, you know, to push along, especially being a woman of color. And so I went on to teach middle school science, and I loved it. I taught earth, life, and physical science for years, and I thought, how could I be paid for something that seems so fun and so purposeful, and me being able to be in kids and families' life every day? I couldn't imagine anything more rewarding until I began taking student teachers on in my classroom. And I was also so great at developing teachers, and the university said, well, we'll pay for you to go on and earn your doctorate if you'll come work at the university and go. So I left the classroom begrudgingly and moved on to be an assistant principal. Now, all the positions I've held over the years, the assistant principal was absolutely the worst position for someone like me. Because it's embedded in there that you assist, and you really don't get to do that as an assistant principal. You just get to do some of the things that the principal doesn't want to do, and your ideas really aren't brought to life. I am not a subtle person, and I don't like not being able to activate ideas that I believe will have a profound effect on young people. And so I was so relieved when the principal of record, she had to go on sick leave during my first few months at her site. And I was blessed with the fortune of having a retired principal come to my aid and help me. And her name was Walterine Stribling, and she stood about 5 foot high. And the first week, she just said, Natasha, you listen to everything I say, and then you make it yours. And you do what you need to do. I'll take care of the rest here. Well, when I tell you, Ms. Stribling is responsible for the way that I'm able to carry myself and the courage I bring into the work, knowing that our work is purely centered in impacted children's lives. Because here's the deal, when you don't know how to read, the world is closed off to you, period. But when you know how to read, whether you choose to do something else or not, it's up to you. So I figured out, how do we create a system in an elementary school where we have time and financial constraints to make sure that any student who enters into my building will leave knowing how to read? So as a science teacher, I went back to it, created several different iterations until finally I found a recipe that worked. At that time, Kaya Henderson was our chancellor, and she recruited me from Buffalo, New York, and I came down here to prove what was possible. And so spending the past 8 years in Ward 8, where we were able to take a school, my first school, 5% of my students knew how to read at or above grade level. That amounted to about 2 students. And I thought, how could a travesty like this occur and there not just be like an alarming sense of urgency around the community and everywhere else? And so once things started to shift and people saw that our students were progressing in acquiring language, folks started taking notice. And so I moved my service to Lecky Education Campus, where I had the honor really of serving families who came from around the world, generals' children, captain students, and that kind of thing. And we actually won the home school moms because they said, you really do know how to teach reading. Now, going back to me being the second of 5 siblings, my youngest sister moved to the area, she has 2 boys, and they moved to Prince George's County. And for the county to be so close to the district, it was literally a 10-year gap in the progression and the quality and value of education between those two. And I thought to myself, if I could do it here in Ward 8, why wouldn't I be able to do this in Prince George's County, Maryland, where there's such a populace of middle to affluent African Americans, and all the literature has always told us that it was Black and brown kids who were low income that couldn't do. And so Prince George's County presented a different case for me as a science teacher to go in and disrupt and interrupt. And so 2016, I stepped away from being a principal and put all of my time and energy in working with my husband, my sister and her husband, who has the 2 students. And we did everything we could to get our nonprofit Equity Now started. And when we thought of why we would call it Equity Now, is because we said that we can't promise kids that things will be better in 10 years. How do we ensure that things are better tomorrow for our youth? And what did that mean for us in terms of how we grew up? And so we thought, well, if we know how to take care of ourselves through agriculture, if we know what financial education means to and for your immediate family, and then you have a solid liberal arts education, then anything is possible, because it comes to the place where we look at everyday people who are doing the best that they can, who still struggle to make ends meet. We see people who are very well intended, who still have health problems, because there's a disconnect somewhere, right? In terms of how you are relating to food, how you are relating to money, how you're relating to just the information that we have at our fingertips. And so we said, what would be the largest nexus for the greatest impact? And so that's how Legends Charter School came to be. The logo of the school is my nephew Asa, and he's always been such a remarkable young man in the sense that he is fearless, I would say, and probably his parents very fearful to see such a verbose child so full of life and energy, and would be so exact with what he wanted. And I said, I can't imagine Asa going to a school where he would be governed in such a way that might dim his light. And so when I thought about Legends Charter School, in the same vein of calling on Clint Smith's words, Legends Charter School is a safe house for kids. It's a safe house for teachers who want a better tomorrow. And one of the cornerstones of a Legends education is financial education. And so what that means for us is super cool. When you come into our classroom, you would have to kind of shake your head to get out of your mind what we imagined when we went to school. And our kindergarten classrooms are named Disney, Netflix, Comcast, PepsiCo, because we did a scavenger hunt of all the products and services that boys and girls and families use most. And we actively indoctrinate and make it a part of the students' everyday learned experience to understand the difference between being a consumer and being an owner, and making sure that families understand what it means to open, fund, and invest. And we talk about pathways for a better tomorrow, and making sure that we're fussing with families about more complex issues, in the sense that if you have an Apple phone, we want to make sure that you own Apple stock. If you're doing these things, how are you making sure that you are minding your own financial home? And what that gets into is providing us a space to talk about some of the emotionality that's tied to finances, right? When you don't believe you have enough, then you're making poor food choices. And you're doing things, and we're here disrupting that. And so it's so great to see Sassy Pants students fussing with their grandmas to say, I don't want my grandma buying me anything for Christmas because my mom will do that, but I can take that and buy my Target stock. And to hear students literally in the 5th grade making presentations to discuss and talk about the upcoming split with Google and Amazon, and for the students to really conceptualize these topics and have investment buddies and talk about why they are making these decisions now. In our first year, where we served 600 students opening up in COVID, 30% of our population opened and funded stock accounts for their children. And when I tell you, you can feel the tide change for students across the board, and to be able to have a very authentic way of engaging with families beyond coming to math or literacy night is such a shift. Because I know as an educator mom, I would write them a check every year and say, good luck, the kids can read, they can do this. But in terms of me having a place for community and fellowship that made sense to me, that wasn't my experience as a mom or my interest. But what we do have now is an entire generation of entrepreneurial-oriented women who want to know how to grow their business, and we also provide a space for them in what we call our marketplace. And so we have young women entrepreneurs who have wonderful candle businesses, lotions, vending machines, you name it, who just need someone to say, you can do it, and here's the community, and let's get started so that you can provide for your own. And so I'm so proud that this week marks the 2nd year that our charter was approved, and our school will grow to 900 students over the next few years to serve students in grades K through 8. And so what I love and appreciate about the District of Columbia is that we do have a different sense of community. We have a different sense of support for one another. As a principal in the district, there wasn't one thing that I could ever imagine wanting that I wasn't able to go out into the community and ask for. From an outdoor classroom, my school housed one of the 5th largest collections of books in the city. But to create that same sort of generosity in Prince George's County, Maryland, has been a challenge. And so meeting Musa and inviting me into a space to even share my story in hopes of you knowing someone who can touch someone, who can touch someone, who can then be a blessing to Equity Now and Legends, is why I'm here calling you guys to the wonderful service that I know that you have a long-standing history of, and in hopes that we can expand the sphere of influence and provide the same sort of high-quality education to parents who want better for their students in our neighborhood of Maryland and Prince George's County. So I want to thank you guys for having me today, hearing my story, and hopefully growing into a fruitful friendship down the road. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yes, so we'd like to do a little Q&A, including from our virtual attendees. But let's start with those